Dragon Age Origins is considered to be the best Dragon Age of the series, and it's also to be considered one of the best games of all time. And people are wondering, why? How? How is the first game the best when normally a game series is slowly evolving and is slowly getting better? Especially now with Dragon Age Veilguard being around the corner, a lot of people are wondering maybe this is finally the Dragon Age game which will close the gap to Dragon Age Origins. So let's have a look at Dragon Age Origins, why it was so good, and why the other two games couldn't necessarily live up to it. So when Dragon Age Origins came out, the RPG genre was a little bit of a turmoil. Like a lot of developers and publishers didn't really know where to go with it, and a lot of them tried to appeal to a much younger audience, and RPG games slowly became this teen younger audience fantasy. And BioWare just stepped up and said, no, we are developing a new IP, and this will be targeted at adults. And wow, what an adult game it was. There is blood everywhere, dismemberment, a lot of nudity and sex. And no, we are not talking about the Mass Effect kind of nudity. We are talking about the full blown nudity. And even the world and the topics they covered were adult themed. You know, when you are looking at the world, it was a very dark, grim world. Humanity has kind of given up. And there was also this new enemy approaching. And the Grey Wardens, which you're a part of, were there to protect humanity, but they all got slaughtered. And one of the reasons also for that was that, like, humanity being humanity, just because they have an existential threat in front of them, they just can't stop to screw themselves up in the process, right? They're betraying each other, they're all playing for their own gains instead of like focusing on this big new threat in front of them. And you were in the midst of it. It was a bit like Game of Thrones, but you were not part of any of the big houses. You were just in the middle of it, and you had to navigate all of them. And you made a lot of meaningful decisions. Like a lot of the decisions you made were sometimes, well, you considered them as being good, but then they played out to be terrible, right? Like you had a lot of good intentions, and then they were just going to shit. Like, I still remember this one particular quest where you basically met a child which was lost in the war, right? And you were like, yeah, sure, I bring you home to your parents, I bring you home safely, and it's all good. And while you were traveling with the child, you slowly realized that this child was probably possessed by a demon. And so you could make decisions regarding that, which sounded awful. But if you just decided to say, nah, it cannot be that bad, and you deliver the child to the parents, the child would murder them all. And it, like, you had those good intentions in Dragon Age Origins, and they were sometimes god awful. And like there were just so much to it, and you always felt like you were changing the world in the positive or negative way. And yes, even though the ending was kind of whatever, right? Um, till up till that point, everything mattered. And yes, your decisions would matter which ending you would get because there were different endings, right? But it wasn't just the RPG story elements, it was also the gameplay, which was just fantastic. You could play the game in a way that it was close to turn based combat. Not fully, it was like a pseudo kind of deal, but you could still make it feel like this was a turn based combat system. And I would even go so far to say that Dragon Age Origins was the prototype of what Baldur's Gate 3 is now, right? And but yeah, the gameplay, the combat was really great. The RPG elements, there were so many builds, so many items, so many classes you could feel. Like there was still this hint of D&D in Origins, right? And well, after all this, Dragon Age 2 was announced, and a lot of people were hyped for it. They were like, oh my god, what will they do? What have they learned from the first one and can bring into the second one? This would be amazing. And then it turns out to be an action adventure? Huh? Confused noises. It was just weird, right? It wasn't the game people saw as one of the top games of all time. It was an action adventure tuned down a little bit to appeal to a younger audience again. Yes, there was still blood there were still like some mature topics, but it was really tuned down. We now use like high fantasy. The story was basically non-existent. Nobody cared. The side stories were not interesting, and everything just felt like the usual action adventure of the time you have played to the dozen, and there was nothing special about it anymore. And people were so disappointed by it. There is one thing I still believe: Dragon Age 2 did much better than Dragon Age Inquisition, and that was it had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and the developers knew how to go for the end. Like, I know it sounds kind of weird to say this, but the best thing about Dragon Age 2 was that it ended. And you might think, wow, that's a backhanded compliment, isn't it? No, because cue Dragon Age Inquisition. Dragon Age Inquisition was announced and then came out, and it was much closer to Dragon Age 2. Yes, classes and talent trees basically came back. There were more RP elements, and you could even pause again. So it definitely felt closer to Dragon Age Origins. But one of the biggest issues this game had was at the time when it came out, there was still a little bit of the MMO craze going around, and live service games were not really a thing at the point yet, right? And so they tried this weird concept of MMO elements with normally things you would see in a live service game, but they still tried to deliver on an epic story, and it just didn't work. It did go so far, even that you need a point system to go further in the campaign. So if you wanted to push forward in the main campaign, the game would say, you better have 15 Inquisitor points before you can proceed. How do you get Inquisitor points? By doing absolutely useless and mindless and boring MMO quests. Hey, can you bring me 10 pelts of wolves? Hey, can you bring me meat from boars? Hey, can you do a horse race against yourself in a circle? That will net you 1 Inquisitor point. And it's like, wait, what? I'm the Inquisitor. I am trying to save the world here, and I'm doing horse races with myself? What is this? Right? Like, this game just tried to stall the main story as much as possible because it was also relatively short in comparison. It was a relatively short game, and they tried to blow this up. Instead of having just a 30-hour Dragon Age game, they tried to blow this up into 50, 60, 70 hours with all those useless quests. I think if my memory serves me right, and please let me know in the comments if I'm wrong on this, but I think there was a phone app at some point where you could send out your companions to collect items and stuff, right? And you can do that in the game. And then you send your companions out for like 3 or 4 hours, and then they would return with some items. But I think there was also a phone app that kind of pushed. It was definitely one of those weird games where the gaming industry just tried to do a lot of stuff, and it just didn't work out, right? And so I'm hoping from what we have seen of Dragon Age Veilguard that, well, we are now much closer to Dragon Age Origins, that the RPG elements are really big again, which it seems like, right? We have seen the classes, we have seen the talent trees, and they are big. Like I would say they're even bigger now than in Dragon Age Origins. It looks fantastic, like all the different stats on the items. I hope that we have some really dark decisions again. Yes, I know graphic is still very colorful, very high fantasy, but if they're making it dark, then I don't really mind. And that's like kind of what I'm hoping for, that they finally learned their lessons and that we are getting a little bit closer to what Dragon Age Origins was. But with that said, we're done with the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like. And also, if you're new to the channel, you want to see more Dragon Age videos, and of course, the closer we are getting to the release, we will definitely come back to that. Would also appreciate if you might consider to subscribe. With that said, have a good one. Stay safe. Bye bye.